Hey pod people, I'm Stacy.
And I'm Heather.
Welcome to Why Do People Do That? So today we are going to talk about why we allow ourselves to be so affected by other people and what we can do to be less affected by other people so that we don't allow this stuff that other people are carrying around to kind of steal our sparkle
Aw.
or our happiness or our thunder and allow their stuff to become our stuff.
Stacy's got a roadmap. She's going to teach us how.
Yes. So here's our roadmap.
Okay.
So let's start with, so where does this come from? So for me, this comes from years and years and years of working with people, right? So I've been a social worker now for almost 30 years.
Me too.
Yes, we both have been social workers for 30 years. So this is probably something you can relate to. And you might not realize it, but when I start to speak, it might all make sense. You tell me.
Let's hope so.
Okay. So when I first started, and I was 23 years old and I had just graduated, I found myself very much affected by others. It was hard for me to have good boundaries. And the feelings, the big feelings that my clients had were so easily internalized by me because I'm an empath and I feel the feelings of others and I internalize the feelings of others. I was very, very easily affected by how other people were feeling.
Well, it's our job to be the container of all of that. That's why they're coming in for therapy.
Yes. Container and affected, though, are two different things.
True.
So one of the things we have to learn, right, as social workers, is how do we be a container, right? How do we allow our room and our space to be a container, but to be less affected? So what do I mean by that? What does it mean to be affected by somebody? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do today is I am going to pull from a lot of examples of clients I've worked with over the years, but maybe just sort of adjust some of the details a little bit so that there's no privacy issues or anybody that's listening will
Oh my God, that's me.
hear the story and be like, that's me, she's talking about. So I'm gonna, it's partially fiction and partially nonfiction, but most importantly, it's good examples to help people understand where I'm going. Okay, so let's talk about a couple I worked with many, many years ago where the wife, and this was a real live, session coming in. This was a real thing, right? Where the wife comes in, her and her husband had been fighting, and the husband was very upset. And the issue he talked about was, I get really upset at night, and my wife and I fight because I really like for us to get into bed together, spend some time, cuddle. We're both so busy all day long. And this is our time together. And she wants to go sit in the big chair in the corner and read a book. And I'm mad at her. And now we're fighting. And so I asked, tell me more about that. What's the fighting about? Right? And the wife says, well, I just want to sit in my big chair and read a book. And I have to hear from him about how I don't care about him. I don't want to spend time with him. I'm just sitting in the chair and reading a book to avoid him, making it all about him. And, it's bullshit, and she's mad. And they're sitting in my office and they're yelling at each other.
They're in therapy.
They're in therapy and they're mad and they're yelling and there's all these feelings coming up. And so when I pause with them and I try to break it down into what's happening, here's what's happening. What's happening is wife wants to sit in her big chair and read a book before she goes to bed. Why? Why does she want to do that? Is it to avoid her husband?
It could be.
It could be, but it's not. If we ask the wife, why do you want to sit in that big chair? And she'll tell you, that was my childhood chair. That chair was in my house, in my room growing up. Every night before I went to bed, my mother sat in that chair with me and she read to me. And that's how I shut down at the end of the day. It's very nurturing. It's soothing. I have very stressful days. My job is very stressful. I'm a nanny. I work full time with these little kids. It's very overwhelming. One of the kids has a disability. By the time I come home,
So it's a comfort for her.
Very much so. It's a comfort for her, and it's how she shuts down and goes to sleep. She doesn't know how else to go to sleep. Why is the husband upset? The reason he's upset,
He's feeling rejected.
because he is assigning meaning to her behavior. So that's one of the big things I want to talk about today. And I want to make our pod people aware of when they're doing this, because everybody is doing this all the time. And some people realize it and some people don't. We are story writers, and we are constantly writing stories, whether we realize it or not, about the others in our life and what it means that they're doing what they're doing, right? So the meaning he assigned to his wife sitting in a chair and reading was,
She doesn't love me. She's not attracted to me. She doesn't care about my feelings.
right, makes it all
Rejection.
about him. And his story is about rejection. Why is his story about rejection? Because he's got his own life he's lived, full of incidents of feeling rejected, feeling less than, feeling unimportant, and there's a lot of trauma in his own childhood around not being nurtured, not being cared about, not being seen. And so because that's where he's come from, that is the story he writes, and that's what he sees, and that's what's real to him. And so that's the meaning he assigns to his wife's behavior. And so now, because he's assigning this meaning, he's hurt, he's sad, he's angry, probably scared, right? What does this mean that my wife doesn't even want to get into bed with me, that she's avoiding me, that a book is more important than me? What does that mean? What does it mean for our marriage, right? That's some scary stuff he's writing for himself. So now he starts lashing out at the wife, right? And what she's on the receiving end of is, you're doing something wrong. You're cold, you're unfeeling, you're selfish, you're rejecting me. And she's like, it's story time.
I just want to read a book.
It's time for bed. That means I have to sit in my chair and read a book. That's just, that's what I do for me. This has nothing to do with you. This isn't about you.
But did they have that conversation?
No, they didn't have that conversation. You know
I guess
why?
that's why they're in therapy.
But do you know why they didn't have that conversation? Because they're not aware. So now here's what's happening. They're both affected by each other. So here's what's happening. She's affected by him because now she's internalizing his stuff. He's writing a story. He's lashing out. He's making accusations towards her, right? And now she's feeling all sorts of feelings about that. Well, what am I doing wrong? I can't do anything right. No matter what I do, he's mad at me, right? I guess I did something wrong, right? And at the same time, he's affected by her, right? She doesn't care about me. The book's more important than I am. She's finding excuses to avoid me, right? So they're both writing stories, and they're not seeing the other person. So what they're doing, right? You got to kind of look at it like, and I'm sorry about the graphic, but I feel like the best way to explain this is to say they're both holding a bag of shit, right? They're both holding a bag of shit, right? And they're each throwing their shit at the other person. The shit he's throwing at her is, I have a history of being rejected, and now I'm going to take my fear and my history and my trauma and my needs, and I'm
play
going
that
to,
out. Yep.
and I'm going to impose it on you, and because I need something from you. And what's her bag of shit? Her bag of shit is wanting to please the other person, right? Her bag of shit is not wanting the other person to be upset with her. Her bag of shit is saying, how dare you accuse me? I didn't do anything wrong, right? She's mad. She's defensive, right? So she's taking her poo and she's throwing it back at him. So now what you have is two people who love each other, who don't have the awareness to understand what's coming up for them, right? And they're completely triggered by each other's bag of shit, right? And so now they're lashing out at each other. They're in fight or flight because they feel unsafe, and they're just
flinging shit.
They're flinging shit, and the shit is flying, right? And now here they are, and this is happening all the time. And now they're coming into therapy, and they're like, you know what? I love my husband. I love my wife. When we get along, things are great, but we're constantly coming into these problems, and we don't know what to do about it. And my answer to them, in simplest terms, even though it's complicated, is you don't see each other. You're not seeing each other. You're looking at each other through the lens of the story writing that's coming from the meaning you assign to the other person.
That's deep.
Yes, that's why we're here. So, but does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know what I'm talking about, right? And this is new information that I'm giving to you. So I want to make sure it makes sense to you, because then we know it makes sense to the pod people.
Hopefully.
Right? So it is deep, right? So let's just sort of absorb that for a minute, right? Let's just think, right? I want you to do this exercise with me. And I know you don't really like doing that.
Oh, so much pressure.
Yeah. But try to think about, and it doesn't have to be somebody really close to you or important to you in your life, even though it can be. Can you think of just an example of yourself or somebody you know that is affected by somebody else in their life? And it doesn't have to be a husband and wife. The reality is we have so many relationships in our lives. It could be a coworker, it could be a child, it could be a parent, it could be a spouse, it could be a friend, it could be, you know, the person checking you out at CVS. I mean, like checking out like what you're purchasing, not like checking you out. You know,
so much better of a story if they were checking me out. But it's funny because I sort of stopped thinking as you're telling this story. I'm thinking like of us young and single and kind of waiting for someone like to call or to text, and they didn't call, they didn't text, and the story you kind of create, they don't like me, I'm not pretty enough, like that whole narrative that you go through in your head, and you call your friend and they talk you out of it and like, no, he's just an idiot and you're great, and but those kind of stories that you tell yourself, that internal dialogue that you have.
We are doing it all the time with other people, right? We are constantly writing stories about what the other person is doing. Let me give you another example. This is a couple again, but again, remember, this doesn't have to be about couples. It doesn't have to be husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend, or wife, husband, husband. This could be in any relationship, right? But this is a good example because, the way that we worked through it, I really tried to work with helping the husband to see the wife's trauma. And once he was able to see her, he really let go of the responsibility that he was holding for her feelings. So here's the story. I'm just going to change the details a little bit for privacy reasons. Okay, so the wife is on a trip. She's on a business trip. And she's coming back from the business trip. And she asks husband, can you pick me up at the airport? And the husband says, of course I can pick you up at the airport. What time does your plane get in? She tells him, great, I'll see you at the airport, right? Husband has ADHD. He's not really that great with time management and seeing the future and knowing how long it takes to do things, right? We do have an ADHD episode where we talk all about that, right? Time blindness is a real thing. It is a real thing. It has nothing to do with how he feels about her, whether or not he loves her. He's not good with time, right? And it was rush hour. It was like a Friday at 5 o'clock, right? So between having the time blindness and, it being rush hour and not planning ahead for that, because organization is also an issue for people with ADHD.
He was late.
He was 15 minutes late picking her up from the airport.
That's nothing.
Yes, but to her, it was the end of the world. She internalized this. The meaning she assigned to it was, you didn't miss me. I'm not important to you. You did not care that I was away. So where did she get all of that from, right? The meaning she assigned was, if you missed me, you'd be so excited that I'm coming
there early.
home, that you'd be there with bells on, you'd be there early, you'd be like, oh my God, I can't wait to see my wife. I miss her so much. But the fact that you're late indicates that you didn't miss me, you don't care that I was away, right? I'm not important to you. And so now they're in session with me, and it's ugly. I mean, we're at the point now where they're talking like, maybe we need to break up, right? And so I said, let's unpack this. And I said to the wife, what was happening for you? So she describes what I just said. I don't want to repeat it. I said it already. This is what's going through her head. And I said to the husband, can you see her? Can you see what this meant for her? And in that moment, he went into a rage and he said, I can't do anything right. I can't do anything right. No matter what I do, it's not good enough. Everything is wrong. And so I'm sitting there as the therapist and I'm like, wow, what I've got in my office right now is 2 children. And I don't mean that in a derogatory, sort of put them down kind of a way. I mean this in an inner child kind of a way. I said, they're both sitting here in my office with their childhood traumas, and they're assigning meaning to each other's behavior. And they're not able to see each other. They don't see each other. What are they doing? They're holding their bag of shit, right? What's their bag of shit? Their childhood trauma, right? So I said, okay, think. Therapist hat, what am I going to do? And so I say, well, if I'm going to have this be processed in a productive way, I need to bring one of them back into their adult self and allow the other one to continue to be the child, right? So who's the healthier one? I picked the husband because he does happen to be the healthier one in this scenario. So I said, I wonder if we can take turns, right? I'm speaking to their inner child. We're going to take turns. And I'm just going to choose randomly, you're going to go first. And so I looked at the husband. I said, is it okay if your wife goes first? And he says, yeah, she can go first. Great. So I say to her, I want to hear your story. So she tells me her story. And I say to her, I see. So the meaning that you've assigned to your husband's behavior is that he doesn't care about you. And she's like, what do you mean the meaning I assigned to it? I said, well, that's the meaning you assigned to it. Do you know that he didn't care, or do you assume he didn't care? I guess I assumed he didn't care. Okay. Just so we're clear.
And what's making me crazy with all of this is I mean, if you're in a relationship with someone with ADHD, this isn't the first time he's done that. She has to recognize that this is his behavior.
She couldn't, because it was not her present adult self in that moment. It was her inner child, right? So I asked her to explore. We reflected and explored, and what came up for her was a very vivid memory right after her father passed away when she was about 4 years old. And her mother, who was now a single mother to 4 children, had to work a gazillion jobs. And she was being taken care of by her older siblings. The oldest of the 4 siblings was 11, and she was 4. So just try to imagine what was going on in that household, right? She was starving, right? And so she found something in the kitchen to eat, which wasn't a healthy thing to eat. Ended up having to have her stomach pumped.
Oh.
It was a whole big to-do. And the mother was so frantic and felt so guilty about what happened that she ended up lashing out at the child, my patient.
The 4-year-old.
The 4-year-old. How dare you? How could you? Look what you've done. Blah, 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 blah. There was so much neglect and abandonment in her life growing up. She felt unseen, unloved, invalidated. And it was just really a lot of unfortunate circumstance. So when something like this happens, right, when her husband is late picking her up at the airport, it's not her present adult self that says, hey,
there was traffic.
He's got ADD. This is what he does. No, it's her inner child that comes up because she's terrified. She is terrified. So she goes through this whole memory and she's talking and I'm watching the husband while she's talking and he's just like, wow. And what was so powerful for him in that moment was he was able to let go of her bag of shit. And he realized in that moment, this is her bag of shit. This isn't my bag of shit. So he's saying all those things he was saying before I can't do anything right no matter what I do. He realized in that moment, this isn't about me. This really has nothing to do with me. Her anger towards me is not about me at all. It's a trauma response. And she's assigning meaning to what I'm doing, not based on me, not based on who I am.
Based on her own history and experience.
Yeah, based on her own history and experience. And so he was able to completely remove it from himself. He was able to put up this invisible glass wall in front of him. She can throw all the shit at him she wants. It's not going to hit him anymore because he realizes this isn't about me. So even though it sucks to have someone be mad at you and to be acting out and lashing out, the fact that he's able to see her, to really see her, to see her experience and to understand that her reaction is not about him, her disappointment in him, but more the story that she's writing based on her own history and her own experience and the meaning she's assigning to it that has nothing to do with him, he now no longer needs to get defensive. Now let's talk about him for a minute. Now he's a kid with ADD, ADHD, growing up in a household with a mother who's a hoarder.
Oh.
Okay. A father who's never home, and a couple of siblings with mental illness and all sorts of dysfunction going on. And he took on the role in his family to be the person to make everything okay all the time, right? So he now needs to always please, always make everything okay, have control. So what's it like for him to try to do everything right, right? And be constantly having his spouse disappointed in him for things that really have nothing to do with him in the first place, right? So he's so triggered by her reaction because it triggers his stuff. And now he's assigning meaning to her behavior. The meaning he's assigning to it is,
I'm not good enough. I can't do anything right. I'm always disappointing people.
100%. That's exactly. So, but the minute that he was able to really see her, he stopped writing a story about her behavior. He stopped internalizing it. He stopped making it about him. He was able to create a boundary around himself, put that invisible glass wall around himself where he could no longer be affected by what she's throwing at him. And instead, he could really just have sympathy or empathy for her reaction, her reactiveness to him, and be able to say, this isn't about me. I didn't do anything wrong. Just because she is upset doesn't mean I've done something wrong.
So is that the healthiest response in a circumstance like that? She's screaming, you don't care about me, you don't love me, you were late because you don't value me. I mean, is that his, next time that happens, is that his response? Like,
yep. So his response is to
this isn't about me.
To not make it about him, to not become reactive, to not start fighting with her. Well, I can't do anything right. I did this, I did that, defending himself. Instead, just look at her and to just validate her experience, because it's not about him. He doesn't have to defend himself, right? This is her experience, right? For him to say, I see that you're feeling disappointed. I see that you're feeling hurt. Because the reality is, somebody can be hurt, but that doesn't mean you did something wrong. It doesn't mean you don't ever do anything wrong. Right? But like if you and I had plans to do something together and, let's say I was really excited to hang out with you. We're going to go and we're going to do this. We're going to have
You should always be really excited to hang out with me.
Always really excited to hang out with you. So, I mean, we've been friends a long time. So obviously I like hanging out with you. And then you call me that day and say, I have the flu. I'm not going to be able to come. I could be really upset that you can't come. I could be really upset that now our plans are canceled. I could be really disappointed. But does that mean you did something wrong just because I'm disappointed?
No, you can't control the flu.
Right. But think about it. How many of you, think about it, like really process for a minute, go through your life taking other people's behavior personally.
And assigning meaning to it, absolutely.
All the time, right? We're always assigning meaning to other people's stuff. You don't appreciate me, you don't care, You know that that's important to me. I mean, this is something I hear all the time when I'm working with families or couples or even just friends. She knows how important it is to me that I load the dishwasher the right way, that I'm so meticulous about it, and that it should be done a certain way. And she's not taking the time to do it that way, so she doesn't care. She doesn't care how it makes me feel. Is that the case? Is it that she doesn't care? Or is it just that that's not how she does things? Right? Are we assigning a meaning to the other person's behavior, maybe, that is inaccurate? And we can apply this to so many things.
Oh, I'm still with you in the dishwasher thing.
Tell me about the dishwasher.
There is a right, we've had this conversation, there is a right way to load the dishwasher.
Yes.
And people in my home don't do it.
Is it because they don't love you and don't care about how it makes you feel? Or is it just that that's just not who they are?
See, I am smart enough to know that it is not that they don't love me and don't care about me.
Yeah.
They don't care about dishes. But
or maybe it's
but if they did care about me, why can't they just put the dishes in the dishwasher and correctly? It's that hard.
If you care about him, you'll just accept that that's who he is and that's how he loads the dishwasher.
It's both of them. It's the kid too. I don't think she knows we have a dishwasher. I left it open today because that might clue her in to put the stuff away. Just walked over it.
Yeah.
Didn't say it. Just didn't say it.
Yeah. But
I love you guys. I really do.
Are we talking about poor John again? Poor John. He tries so hard. John who just shows up on Christmas. But think about it, right? How many times maybe have you gotten upset?
More than I realistically should be.
But maybe you're more upset than you should be because you are personalizing it and you are assigning meaning to it. It's hard not to.
Yeah.
Right? We do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have learned, I think, through my profession, through what I do, because to survive as a social worker, because you are sitting with people's emotions. And when you are a social worker because you care about people and you're doing this because you want to help people, it's very difficult to not internalize or to not take it personally when they're upset with you or disappointed in you, if you have to cancel or if you're running late, if you go on vacation. I mean, I've had patients get mad at me for going on vacation. So it's very hard to not internalize and to have good boundaries. And I've learned over the years how to do that because I have to. I have to. And I've learned through helping others, and I've learned through helping my patients. And what I see, in all different kinds of relationships, friendships and siblings and, husbands and wives and spouses and parents and children, that it is this concept of assigning meaning to somebody's behavior, writing a story about their behavior, allowing your feelings and your needs to be triggered by what they do or don't do, and to not allow yourself to see where you end and they begin, right? At some point, you end and John begins. And maybe it's not even that John doesn't care about dishes. He probably does care about dishes. He just doesn't assign the same importance to how they're stacked in the dishwasher, because in his brain it's probably just like they're going in the dishwasher, they're getting clean,
shove them
just shove them in. However, I mean, I'm sure I don't put the dishes in the dishwasher the right way at all. I'm totally a type B personality. I'm completely disorganized. So if you saw my dishwasher, you'd probably not want to be my friend anymore. Certainly wouldn't want to be my roommate. But it would have nothing to do with how I feel about you. It's just like, that's how my brain works, and maybe for John and the kid, maybe that's how their brains work, right? And for you have feelings about it. When you see the dishes not go in the dishwasher the right way, it triggers an emotion in you. So here's the thing. When emotions come up in us, when our emotions are triggered, we have this automatic response that we don't even realize is happening, where we find fault with somebody. Who did it? Whose fault is it? Who's making me feel this way? Somebody did something wrong. And that's why I feel this way. Heather canceled plans with me. It's her fault I feel this way. Right? I had this argument with my son. I think it was last year. He was at like I think it was an Islander playoff game, which is always disappointing, the Islander playoff games.
Aw.
And so I don't remember what team they were playing at the time, but it was at UBS. It was at the Islanders arena, and somebody was there wearing a jersey, rooting for the other team, and he was upset and disappointed that the Islanders were losing, and the guy a couple of rows behind him was rooting for probably the Hurricanes, was rooting for the other team. He took it very personally. That guy was yelling and being, oh yeah, whatever, just to piss me off.
Oh, wow.
Right? He was just being a sore winner. He was being a this, he was being a that, right? And I said to him, what was happening for you is a lot of big feelings were coming up for you. And we have a tendency as humans, when big feelings come up for us, to feel like we need to blame someone. It needs to be someone's fault, right? And so here you are, you're so affected by this guy being happy that his team is winning. But it wasn't about you. He's not rooting for his team to piss you off. He's just a guy at the hockey game.
Excited about his
Excited that his
winning.
team is winning, and you're internalizing it and you're making it about you. And now here you are at this game, and now you can't even enjoy your time at the game because you're so affected by this guy because of the story you're writing about this guy. That this guy is just trying to stick it in your face and just trying to rub it in your face and trying to shove it up everyone's butt. That you're losing, and he's just an
Rooting for his
excited
team.
Hurricanes fan. That's all.
He's not there to piss you off.
Right? He's just there to root for his team and be happy and excited. Right? Like if you were there, you wouldn't be there to piss off the Hurricanes fans. You would be there
because you're cheering on your team.
Yep. Right? So you're writing a story and you're blaming because you need to place those emotions somewhere because they feel so big to carry around for yourself. Right? So we are all of the time allowing others, right, to have such a huge effect on us. And so my challenge to you and to our pod people is to really start to take a look at where we're writing stories, where we're assigning meaning to other people's behavior, and where we are allowing our stuff to infiltrate and project so much onto those around us that we don't see them. That all we see when we look at the other person is the projection of our own stuff, and vice versa. They're projecting their stuff onto us, and now instead of separating ourselves from it, building a boundary around it and saying, this isn't about me, this is their stuff. Right? So what's an example of that? Right? So here's another, I've got lots of stories. So here's another story.
Ask me and answer it. Go ahead.
Do you have a story?
I don't.
Yeah. If you do, please interrupt me.
Jump in. No,
Jump
but
in.
But it's interesting too. Like I'm just thinking, we have something written on the wall at work in an inpatient facility about, being mindful and like not being, being respectful because you have no idea what other people are going through. And I'm just kind of thinking, we've got 15, 20 patients in there in group, 8 groups a day, all day long for 28 days. And it's a lot of emotions that'll come up, and like it's 24/7. So it's like a bizarro like sleepaway camp where like they're just all there. We say that all the time. And like these arguments that will come up, and like, he drank my orange juice, and it's like, it's not about the orange juice. And like, is it the end of the world that the guy took your orange juice? And
it is, because it's the meaning that they assigned to him taking the orange juice. He doesn't respect me. He doesn't care. He didn't care that was mine. He thinks he can take whatever he wants. He thinks he has control over me. Right? If you ask the person, what meaning are you assigning to, it's amazing what comes up for them.
Yeah, so it's something, we're seeing all day long, constantly at work.
Because it's just human nature, right? We internalize everyone's experience around us because everyone is projecting, right? When I talk about the bag of shit and the throwing, is we're doing this. Like if you go through life you know, picturing everyone carrying
their own bag of shit.
and we're all throwing it at each other, right, all the time. If you visualize that, the reality is that we all have had experiences in life that have been hard, and we are all projecting our stuff onto the others around us, and they're feeling it, and they're picking that up, and they're taking that in, all of this stuff that's being projected onto us. But at the same time, we're projecting our stuff onto others. And so we have to stop and pause and take a look at, you know, what we're doing sometimes and say, well, is that what that person thinks, or is that what I think they think? Right? Because whatever I think the other person is thinking is really what I'm thinking. It's kind of like that that Friends episode. They don't know that we know.
You know that we know. Yep.
No. Yeah. I've got that t-shirt, right? So I'll say that again. Whatever it is that you think I'm thinking is really just what you're thinking.
What I'm thinking.
We don't know what other people are thinking. We only know what we're thinking. So whatever we think is going on in the heads of others is really just our own thoughts. Right? So we are constantly projecting our stuff onto other people. So being self-aware is really helpful, knowing what your stuff is, knowing what your triggers are, and recognizing that other people, they have triggers too.
Have their own stuff.
So try to see yourself and try to see the other person. So this is the story I was going to tell. I like this story, not because it's a great story, because it's kind of sad. I like this story because I think it's a really poignant example of what I'm talking about, right? So I talk about my son a lot. This is again about my son. So when he was a kid, when he was younger, he played basketball. And he was a little bit on the shorter side. And so because he was shorter, he was just sort of an easy target. He got picked on and made fun of and whatever, especially playing sports because he was the smaller one on the team.
Oh, Brandon.
Yeah, sad stuff. He's all right. Worked out. He's 24. Worked out okay. But at the time, it was hard. So this was, I think, 9th or 10th grade. And he was on the basket, not for school, but like a PAL kind of a thing, right? And there was a kid on his team that he had a couple of classes with in school who just sort of naturally gave him a hard time quite often. He was just sort of like a pain in the butt kid, one of the bullyish type kids that was just sort of like picking on my son because he thought it was fun, because he could, because he was small. Anyway, so, you know, my son used to get upset because, you know, like he would play as hard as he could. And he wasn't the best player on the team, but he wasn't the worst. He was fine. And like he would get to school the next day and he'd be feeling good about how the game went the night before. And then this kid sitting in his English class, Brandon sucks. You suck. Brandon threw a bad pass, blah, blah, blah. And Brandon would get all upset and embarrassed. And he would call me from school, come pick me up, blah, blah, blah. It was horrible. Anyway, what's the point? Here's my point. So one day we're at the game. And this guy comes in to the gym. And he was a heavy guy. And so because of his size, he wasn't able to sit in the bleachers where all the other parents were sitting to watch the game, which is fine. Not judging it, I'm just stating a fact. So because he couldn't sit on the bleachers, they had to get a chair for him to sit in the corner of the gym. So here we are, we're all on the bleachers watching, and this dad is sitting on a chair in the corner of the gym. I've never seen this guy before, so I'm not sure whose father this is.
I know.
You can guess where this is going.
I do.
Okay. So the game starts. He starts screaming and yelling at his son while he's playing basketball. You loser.
Oh.
I mean, it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. It was so bad. The coach had to pause the game and ask the dad to either refrain,
take your chair and go,
or leave. It was, I mean, we were all, I mean, the parents in the bleachers were gasping. We were like, right? So whose father do you think that was?
I bet it was Bully's father.
It was Bully's father, right? So, you know, we go home that night and I said to my son, did you notice that dad in the corner? And he was like, yeah, oh my God. that was terrible. I felt so bad for so-and-so. I don't want to say the kid's name. Let's call him Joey. His name wasn't Joey, but let's name him Joey. I felt so bad for Joey. Yeah, I felt bad for Joey too. So I said to Brandon, what did we learn about Joey today? And he's like, his dad's mean? I go, yeah, his dad's mean. I said, so let's really look at Joey. And we had a long talk about it. And so we were able to put two and two together, right? And come up with the idea that maybe Joey found some comfort in being able to project his insecurities, his low self-esteem, his feelings of inadequacy that he was getting from his father onto somebody else, because
So
it
he
was
could feel powerful.
making him feel
Mhm.
powerful, making him feel better, giving him the one up, because he was feeling so bad and down because of how his own father was treating him. And so whenever my son gets upset with somebody's behavior, I remind him of Joey. And sometimes gets frustrated with me and he's like, Mom, can't anyone
Not
ever...
everybody has a big, heavy, mean dad.
He says, can't anyone ever just be an asshole? And I say, no.
People are assholes because of their circumstances and their upbringing and their experiences.
No one is ever just an asshole, even though it feels that way. And sometimes it feels better to think someone's just an asshole. We are all act the way we act for a reason. We project, we internalize. It's all coming from somewhere, right?
That was deep.
It was deep. It was deep. So what's my point? Right? How can we help Heather with the dishes and our pod people at home? I think the most important things here is really to kind of go inward and reflect. Where am I writing stories? What are the triggers for me? Where's my sensitivities? What is it about? Is it when someone cancels plans on me? Is it when my husband's not paying attention to me? Is it when my daughter doesn't load the dishwasher properly?
At all.
Ever.
At all.
Right? So this comes up all the time, right? So in my work with my patients, I see this coming up a lot. We are so deeply affected by the others in our lives because of how we project our own
internal
stuff and how we internalize. And so how do we create better boundaries for ourselves and put up that glass wall in between our experience and their experience so that we can see the other person, so that we're not affected by what they're throwing at us, and so we're not throwing our stuff at them. It's not easy. It's a challenge.
Yes.
Right? It's a challenge. So where might be a good starting off point for you? What do you think?
Well, now I'm feeling really guilty and selfish that I'm making the whole dishwasher thing about me.
Don't feel guilty.
No, but it's funny because just, thinking about it, it's like, oh, that has nothing to do with them not caring and not.
What do you think it's about? Like, so if you were really to see them, right? So if I were to challenge you to see John in regard to this dishwasher thing, why do you, for real, if you were to take your own, projection and your own internalization away and really just look at John as if he's just a stranger that you met or your own patient, why doesn't John load the dishwasher the way you want him to?
He just doesn't care about the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of other things around the house, and I think that's just something that's not important to him. It has absolutely nothing to do with me.
No, it doesn't have anything to do with how he feels about you. Do you think if he loved you more, he'd load the dishwasher differently? Or do you think it's just not something that he processes in his brain and thinks about as being important, and it's just not how he operates?
It isn't.
Yeah.
But it's funny that he's very much a Swiffer guy. He can't stand the clutter. He's constantly wanting things cleaned up, but the dishes,
Yeah,
don't.
it's not his thing.
No, not his thing.
right? Everyone's got a thing. That's your thing. Maybe there are things that are his thing that isn't your thing. Can you
There's
think?
plenty of things that are his thing that are not my thing.
So name one. Name something that he does that drives him crazy that you don't necessarily do his way because it just isn't something that's important to you.
Oh dear God. There's a ton of them, but
Name one.
like clutter, like stuff on, there's a table right by the door that's like the catch-all for stuff.
Yeah.
He loses his mind, and every couple of weeks, months, he will lose his shit that we have too much stuff and like absolutely have a panic attack and like want to run around with a black garbage bag and throw everything out because we have entirely too much stuff, and you know, he'll lose. So clutter makes him absolutely crazy, where it doesn't bother me. I have a pile on my nightstand. I've got a pile here. And not
So-
because I'm saying F you to him.
You have piles because you don't love John?
No,
Why do you have piles?
because they're piles. They're organized. I haven't gotten to them
That's
yet.
who you are. That's how you operate. You can't change the way you operate just because you love John and that's what John wants. You would have to give up too much of who you are and become something you're not, which is not possible. Even when you love somebody, you can't become something you're not. And the fact that you can't become something you're not doesn't mean you don't love them, right? Because you can also twist it into, well, if you loved me, you'd accept me for who I am. And you wouldn't want me to become something I'm not. And you would accept my piles.
Me and my piles.
Right? Because you have a need to hold on to things and to save things, right? We talked about that in our hoarding episode last week. Not that you're a hoarder, right? Entirely. Just
I'm
on
not.
a small level. You have that tendency
To hold on to
say,
things.
this could be useful one day, so I'm going to hold on to it, right? Not to the point that it's overwhelming your space.
It's a small pile.
I've been to your house. The fact that John loses his mind and thinks you have too much stuff blows my mind, because whenever I come to your house, it's like a museum. It's like so neat and organized.
But if we're going back to Friends, we've got like Monica's closet.
Right.
Like he will just jam everything behind a closet somewhere, like so you don't see it. So 90% of the house is.
Where is Monica's closet in your house?
It's my craft room.
Okay.
It's underneath the stairs. All things
It's in
that.
the basement.
Yep.
Okay.
And occasionally in the green room is like just where things go.
Okay. But I've seen your basement. It's like you've got bins with like labels on it.
I know.
It's organized.
Yeah.
It's not cluttery.
Tell John that.
Right. But the fact that you do that has nothing to do with whether or not he's important to you. But do you think he ever assigns meaning to it? Do you think he is ever like, Heather doesn't care about how much this bothers me?
On the monthly rant, yes,
Yeah.
that's the narrative, that we
Yeah.
don't care, and we don't care about, you know, living in a nice clean home.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Because that's just it. When we feel big feelings and the other person is working in a way that is against or different than what we need, we have a tendency to assign that meaning to it. They don't care, right? We talked about this in our very first episode when we were talking about the political divide, right? And we were talking about the division and the two sides, right? That we assign meaning to the other side. You know, you are voting for this person instead of that person. That means you don't care about this
women's
issue.
rights.
You don't care about women's rights because you're voting for that guy.
Don't care about the price of eggs.
You don't care about the price of eggs because you're voting for her, right? And so I'm struggling and you don't care that I'm struggling because you're going to vote for that person, right? We are just constantly in this place where we are making assumptions about the other person that causes us to feel alone or abandoned or neglected or persecuted in a way that is not accurate.
So how do we stop? How do we build that clear boundary?
Just knock it off.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah. That's it. Just stop doing that. So, okay. So what's our tips? What's our checklist? What's the first thing you think we need to do?
I guess become aware, to kind of really stop and look at, try to, you know, not respond immediately and look at why we're having that reaction. Is that person intentional? You know, are they doing that to say that they don't love me, or do they really not care about that ice cream bowl in the sink? That's next to the
Absolutely.
dishwasher, but didn't make it into the dishwasher.
Absolutely, right? So one of the things I always try to teach my patients is to start becoming aware of when you're writing a story, right? So they'll come in and they'll say to me, I got really upset about such and such, and then I realized I was writing a story. And I'll say, great, what was the story you were writing? Right? So part of it is being aware, stopping, pausing, saying, I'm feeling big feelings. What is the story I'm writing about my feelings? What is the story I'm writing about the other person? Is it possible that this is not an accurate story? Is that possible? Is it possible that that's not what this means for them? What I think it means to me isn't necessarily what it means for them. What do I know about them, right? What else could it be? Is there another possibility here I haven't thought of, right?
All deep questions
Yeah.
that will
Because
probably get answers other than the narrative that's going on in my head.
Because the reality is, most of us are not psychic. We don't know what the other person is thinking.
Or intending, or, yep.
Exactly. We don't know. All we know, like I said before, is what we're
You
thinking.
think that I think that what you think?
Right. We know what we're thinking because of our own experience and our own expectations based on what we've experienced in our lives. So, yes, I think that is the perfect first step. I think another step is self-awareness. Being aware of when we're projecting our own stuff onto others, when we're thinking what we think we know that they're thinking, but it's really what we're thinking and not their thinking. That's another step, right? So step one is being aware when you're writing a story. Step number two is be aware when you're projecting your own needs or your own trauma, your own stress onto the other person. Right? I really need I need the dishwasher to be loaded this way. So I'm projecting this expectation onto you, and I'm assigning meaning to the fact that you're not doing it. I need you to be on time, to pick me up at the airport, to show me with enthusiasm how much you've missed me, because I need to know I'm important to you. I need that reassurance, right? But maybe that person doesn't show reassurance that way, right?
I really like the be aware of the story that you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I had to
That's
do
kind of a
that.
simple way of sort of breaking down the like,
Yeah.
hey, is this mean to them what I think it means?
Yeah. I had to do that in my own marriage. I'm a gift giver. I'm really big into it's a birthday, it's a holiday, it's Valentine's Day, it's Christmas, whatever it is, like to really try to think about what does that person want? What do they need? What's something that they've looked at but haven't bought for themselves? And that's something that I learned growing up. My parents were big gift givers. And so I learned growing up that you give a gift, you give a graduation gift, you give a birthday gift. Gifts are a big deal. My husband could not be more opposite. He doesn't like gifts. He doesn't like receiving gifts. He doesn't like giving gifts. His experience growing up was terrible when it came to getting gifts. Like he would get underoos for Christmas and be really disappointed. And so he always looked at the receiving of gifts as being a huge disappointment. And he looks at the giving of gifts as an unnecessary obligation that's just all commercialized, blah, 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 blah. I can go on and on and on about what he thinks. So when we first got together, I remember feeling really sad and hurt when it was my birthday and I
Get the enthusiastic
I didn't get
gift.
anything.
Oh.
Right?
Ooh.
And then, at some point I communicated to him that it was it'd be nice. So then it would be the day before my birthday, what do you want for your birthday?
Oh.
And I was like, you know what? I don't want anything. I don't want to tell you, go buy me a pair of boots. I can buy myself a pair of boots, right? If I want you to think about me and I want you to think, and I remember being in the beginning, I would cry about it. I'd be so hurt and sad. And then at some point, I really saw him. I was like, I really need to look at Mark. I need to see him. And through that experience where I stopped writing a story about how important I am to him and what it meant that he wouldn't buy me a gift, and I really saw Mark, I had to accept that gift giving for him is not what gift giving is for me, and that the experience of it, both the giving and the receiving, is not good for him. It brings up a lot of bad feelings for him.
And his not getting a gift for you is not a reflection of him not loving you
I
and
know
not.
he loves me. I know he does. He proves it in so many ways that whether or not he gives me, and I know that if he's giving me a gift, it's just because he's just like, oh, I'm gonna buy Stacey a gift because Stacey's a gift giver, and if I don't buy her a gift, I suck, right? It's not coming from a place of I really enjoy giving you gifts and I want to give you. He's never gonna feel that way. He's never gonna feel that way. It has nothing to do with me or our relationship. It has to do with his upbringing and his childhood, and I can't change that, but I can accept it. And by accepting it, I no longer have feelings about it. You know,
You're so evolved.
it's been years and years and years in the making of being this evolved. It's just working with people. It's what I do. It's being a social worker, working with other humans for 30 years and listening to them talk and seeing how their brains work and how they think and what comes up for them and the emotions, and working with families and working with couples and working with friends, that I realize this is a constant recurring theme that comes up over and over and over and over, that this is what we do.
So what's one final thing we can tell people that can be helpful with this?
Cut it out. I think
That's super helpful. Thanks, Day.
I think and again, it's this yucky visual, but I think that it's, you know, it's number one, start really being aware of when you're writing the story. It's number two, be really aware of when you're projecting your own stuff onto somebody else. And number three, I think it's about really trying to see the other person, picture the bag of shit in their hands and say, where is that bag of shit coming from? I see that they're holding that. I see that they're throwing it. Let me really see that person, right? Like the story I told about little Joey in the gym, right? When you see that kid acting out like a bully, don't just be like, oh, that kid's a bully, F him, right? Be like, wow, what's his story? What's his story? Where did how did he get here? How did that happen? Right? Like really acceptance, right? I guess that's really like the last piece of it. Acceptance. Can we accept that no one is just an asshole? That nobody is out there intentionally trying to hurt you for no reason? And that most likely when somebody is acting in a way that is affecting you, it's most likely their trauma response and your trauma response banging
Colliding,
heads,
yep.
colliding, right? Your story writing, their story writing, just like the couple I talked about when we first started this pod, right? I talked about how they were, you know, I just want to sit in a chair and read a book. And he's like, I just want her to pay attention to me before bed so that I feel loved before I go to sleep, right? And they were just throwing shit at each other. And they were not seeing each other. It's, you know, try to get into the exercise of seeing yourself
and seeing the other person.
And seeing the other person so that you are creating that boundary. Where do I end and that person begin? Where do they end and I begin? We are not one morphed soul, right? We don't all share a brain. We all have different brains.
Wow. Well, that was brilliant. I'm glad I was a part of this.
So we started this podcast with you having no idea what I wanted to talk about. I think I said to you.
It became about me and my dishes.
You and your dishes. And your neat, organized piles of things that you need.
They're paper clipped. They're in order. It's not just papers everywhere.
I know. I've been to your house. Everything's organized. Everything's got a meaning to it and a purpose. But maybe John doesn't agree sometimes, and he has, you know, feelings, and that's okay. He's allowed to have feelings. Let's see John for who he is and not be upset with him and say, oh, you know, when he's throwing that tantrum once a month, look at John, see him. Say, gosh, John, what's happening for you? What's going on? Don't make it about you. Don't internalize it. Build the boundary. Have the wall, the glass wall. See him over there. Don't take him in and just be like, wow, what's happening for you over there? I'm so sorry you're so upset, right? Don't make it about you. Even though it might feel like it's about you in that moment because it's annoyed at you, It's not about you.
And I think that's a great way to end, and a great kind of takeaway is it's
Yeah.
not about you.
Right. All right. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that makes sense to everybody. And I hope everyone starts going out there and
Being aware of people's bags of shit.
right, seeing the bags of shit, having that glass wall in front of you so the shit doesn't hit you, and be less affected by people, right? That's the whole point, right?
It's not about you.
It's not about you. Okay, so that's it.
We wrapping up?
We're wrapping up.
Okay, I'm Heather.
I'm Stacy, and
This is-
thank you so much for joining us on
Why do people do
Why
that?
Do People Do That? Don't forget to subscribe, click the little plus or the little follow so that you are aware when next episodes come out so you don't miss anything good.